Hey everybody, in this episode, I have on Andrew Thorp King, an entrepreneur and the author of a new book called Failure Rules. He's not like most entrepreneurs. He didn't go to college. He wasn't born into riches. He isn't clean cut and cleanly shaven. And we talk a lot about his three vices and some other cool stuff. Unlike many entrepreneurs, Andy is willing to share the many ways in which he screwed up and had to learn on the fly, just like I have and just like probably you have as well. The stories are very, very interesting, and he has written a great book here. He's not the quote-unquote crush it guy, and he's just not that. He's not saturating social media. He's just the guy who's gotten crushed and gotten back up. The kind of guy we all need to hear from. I had a great time on this episode, and I think you're going to love it. Hey, Andrew Thorp King, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I usually start these podcasts by asking every guest the same simple question, which is how did it happen for you, Andrew? But before I do that, I first want to say something.
Sure.
We're going to talk a lot about your book today, but and I'm going to do a little bio on you too. But I just want everybody to know the one thing I hated about your book.
Ooh, that's where we're starting. Yes. Look at that.
That's how we're going to start. But the one thing I hated about your book was because of time constraints and some other things, I had to read it as a PDF. And I was very disappointed in that because your book is so beautifully written.
Thank you.
That it deserves to be read as a physical thing in my hands, and I was not able to do that, and it pissed me off a little bit. And so I want to just say that's the one thing I hated about your book. Outside of that, I thought it was remarkably well done. And I get a lot of people on here who write books, and I enjoy parts of most of them, but it's just different when you come across someone who can actually write a good book, and you have certainly accomplished that with Failure Rules.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike. I was bracing myself there for some more abrasive type of, a hatred monologue there, but
yeah,
that's an okay thing for you to hate. I think we're still good. We're gonna have a great conversation still.
Yeah, and that'll come later because I do believe. I don't know that if you're from Philly, but I know you got Philly roots that's all throughout your book and stuff. And I am from the same area.
Oh.
So, who knows? Maybe we will get into a little bit of that. I probably not, but right. just a connection that we have. So everybody, before I re-ask Andrew the question, let me tell you a little bit about him. Andrew Thorp King is an executive fintech banker, spy novelist, speaker, punk rocker, podcaster, ex-bodybuilder, cigar lover. He's smoking a cigar as we speak, and serial entrepreneur. He founded 2 independent record labels, Thorp Records and Sailor's Grave Records, and has invested in many spaces, including online lending, fitness, lead generation, and independent music. And here's the thing you don't hear in very many bios. Andrew Thorp King is also a serial failure. He has crashed and burned through bankruptcy, divorce, mortgage default, public assistance, and multiple business failures. But like a jack in the box after a punch, he pops back up every time, rebuilding his life, informed by failure, with a big smile on his face. So with that, Andrew, how did it happen for you?
How to happen? Well, first, let me just finish addressing your initial comments there. I think we can remedy the book format issue by getting you a physical copy offline.
That would be
through
wonderful.
Snail mail. I think we can make that happen. So how did it happen? Let's define it. So I think it would be, for me, the big it is the production of this book, the conviction I had, or the compulsion, or almost spiritual calling to write this book. And getting to the point now where 8 years after feeling that pull, it comes into existence. And I'm now on the show talking with you about the message of the book, right? So that would be my it, if we're going to talk about how it happened at this juncture in my life. So really, it's kind of a culmination of my journey and the lessons I feel I learned over the first real 2 decades of adulthood, my 20s and my 30s, as I endeavored to find ways to marry money with meaning and struggle to interpret what my calling was. And I came to, identify that more as a calling journey with no singular destination, but yet still something that at every touch point, at every consequential decision, I was seeking to make sure I aligned with that. And so it was really kind of understanding, how does that alchemy work? And for me, it was this idea of being in tune with your internal spirit voice, shutting out external voices if they were noisy unnecessarily. Doesn't mean that you shut out wise counsel or wisdom that is around you, right? Certainly not. I sought that in spades, but it was really coming to the realization that it was this notion of an internal spirit voice that we all have inside of us, no matter how we identify or recognize it, that we feel, whether we call it our conscience or our gut instinct or follow your heart or whatever the language we use around it. There's something inside us that I think in consequential decision points, we hearken to that. And I believe it's being in tune with that and putting the internal life, the inner life, the spiritual life above the material and the external, that when we do that, that can guide us and that can help us align with our calling journey path, which is often, as I write about in the book, the 2 words I use the most as adjectives to describe, a true calling journey path is tumultuous and mysterious. It's beautiful. It's the path that will bring you down the highest meaning and allow you to actualize your highest conception of value and meaning to the world, but it is often tumultuous and mysterious.
And this voice, you mentioned your 20s and 30s. Is that where you feel like you discovered it? And what was going on with you before you discovered it?
Yeah, I think it was always kind of there, right? I think, just to be, outward about it. I do believe in a higher power. I believe in divinity. I believe in God. That wasn't always the case. There was a time in my teens where I felt like I was probably drifting into dark spaces and some unhealthy psychology and behavior. And it was during that time where I felt and heard that voice, and I recognized it as a divine one. And that really, from that point on, there was always this need to seek that out. In moments of chaos, in moments of high stakes decisioning, in moments of directional contemplation, whether it be career or marriage or some sort of following of an artistic muse, right? Whether it's writing this book or whatever that might be, interpreting, signaling, and messaging in the world through virtual mentors, through reading, through music, through podcasts, things that end up shaping me and influencing me and kind of building the fabric of who I am and how I present myself to the world. And that has been, that's been my formula, throughout life to make sure that I destroy future regret, because that's what aligning yourself with your calling journey does. If you're constantly aligned with that, even if it does sometimes forthrightly fling you into tumult or into chaos or into disarray at inflection points, ultimately what it does is allows you to live out your highest usefulness in the world, your most unique purpose in the world, if that's discoverable. And when you do that, it's really hard to have regret at the end of the day. I think those that are, suffocated into a life of mediocrity or in a life driven by externals or driven by, kind of what the world might construct for them and impose upon them, that they're susceptible to sickness in some form or another, whether it's mental, physical, spiritual, however it manifests, because they're burying something. And they're burying it often because they're clinging to some notion, real or not, of safety, right? So that's failure rule number 2 is nothing is safe. Failure number 1 is failure purifies. That when you go through this tumultuous, mysterious journey, you're often going to kind of go through that anvil and go through that purification where old thinking dies, new thinking emerges, old ways of being die, new ways of being emerge. It's the phoenix must burn to emerge. It's that imagery that informs that rule. I'll pause there. I said a mouthful.
Yeah. So there's a bunch there that I want to get back to. The Phoenix thing always gets me because you have sort of that Trans Am, like when I was growing up, that was like the rising Phoenix, or some people call it the screaming chicken or whatever. That's incorporated into your book, and then that's the Phoenix that you're talking about, right?
That's right. It's funny you say Trans Am thing. Somebody else pointed that out to me. I never thought of that. To me, it's like aligned with like pinstripe, hot rod imagery and flames. And, I own a record label, Sailor's Grave Records, and I put out a lot of psychobilly bands, which mix punk rock and rockabilly. And so like that hot rod kind of pinstripe thing is part of the aesthetic. So to me, it's like, that's where it came from. But it does look like the Trans Am symbol. So you're totally right there. I never even picked that up. That's kind of funny. But yeah, so I mean, that imagery really came to me at a time where I was going through.
Hey everyone, if you like what I'm doing with this podcast and want to participate in more of the things I'm thinking about and exploring, subscribe to my newsletter today. It's super simple. Just go to 𝘼𝙘𝙧𝙚.com right now, put in your email, and you will get the very next issue. It's short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.
Through a business divorce, which was rather emotional, rather complex, and had a lot of fallout to it. Lots of money on the line, lot of money lost, and relationships, shattered within the business context. And at the same time, in parallel, I was at the beginning of a divorce path with my ex-wife, my first wife. And I was, processing that pain, figuring out how I was going to leverage that chaos as an idea engine to emerge in the next best version of myself.
Yeah.
Right. And my cousin had texted me the lyrics to Beautiful Pain by Eminem. I'm not really into rap, wasn't like an Eminem guy. I'm an old punk rocker, hardcore punk rocker. So I listen to music that a lot of people don't know or wouldn't know the references. And Eminem, at the time, I know he's a little dated now, but it was, kind of mainstream. But my cousin texted me the lyrics, and the lyrics struck me. I started listening to that song, and there's Phoenix imagery in that song. And I was beginning to write some of the initial outlines for Failure Rules then, and that just ended up informing kind of a big part of the whole book. It's not original, like the whole Phoenix in Flames is not original, but it was just so apropos. I couldn't not make that a central theme or connected imagery to the book. And so of course I have the Failure Rules soundtrack on Spotify and Apple Music and everywhere you can find music, and that song's on the soundtrack as a companion piece to the book. So.
Okay. And you mentioned when you were talking before, this notion of knowing who you are and presenting yourself that way, something like that, I think you said. And it made me wonder, like, have you always been able to align both of those in your life, like knowing who you are and presenting yourself as who you are? Or has that been something that's come to you over time?
I think it's over time. I mean, I've always had a strong sense of self. I've always had an internal locus of control. I've always presented myself in ways that were formed by my own internal convictions and not driven by external circumstances or expectations, right? But there's always going to be gradations of that,
Yeah. I was just going to say, even in the cubicle, and, I mean, you go through these different times in your life, and I'm wondering, because I think I do that now, but I don't know if I do it all the time, because I'm intimidated by certain situations or certain people or certain whatever, or my own my own insecurities or whatever it might be. So, it always makes me want to dig a little bit into how everybody's sort of managed their way through it, or thinks they've managed their way through it in life. Because
you touch on something that I have wrestled with very directly and intentionally lately. So I write in the book, obviously the subtitle of the book is Failure Rules, ! Subtitle, The 5 Rules of Failure, and I'll hold the book up here for your readers, for your viewers right now. The subtitle is 5 Rules of Failure for Entrepreneurs, Creatives, and Authentics. I mean, that's not even really a word. I kind of made that up.
Yep.
And I have it as a defined term in the book, authentics. And I define it in a very kind of loose way where it's a spectrum, where you're constantly trying to figure out what that means to you at any given inflection point in your development and the evolution of yourself. Because again, old thinking has to die, so new thinking has to emerge. So your old authentic self might not be the same as your new one. But I think we know when we're not being authentic, right?
Right.
There's a difference, I think, between stretching yourself and allowing versatility into the integration of your evolving authentic self. There's a difference between that and a true, pure drift from your authentic self, where you just know that you're not asserting yourself in the way that you ought to be asserting yourself, given who you are inside. And so I think that's, it's not a clear thing all the time, but I think it's something we ought to pay attention to, ought to wrestle with, and figure out ways to be as authentic as possible, even as we're evolving our authentic self, as we stretch ourselves and challenge ourselves in new settings, in new situations, new experiences, right? And then we basically build on that authentic self through that, but very intentionally. I actually do a video about this on my YouTube channel that kind of goes into a deep dive on that. But you're touching on a very real and important question about trying to judge your own authenticity and how it manifests in the world.
Yeah, and it's a real struggle for me. So I appreciate your perspective on it, and I now especially, and maybe not now especially, but it seems like authenticity, vulnerability are sort of words that everybody tries to use now to describe or define themselves, because that's what is selling right now.
That's right.
Authentic is being vulnerable is selling. Being authentic, yeah. So so I love the way that you created the word authentics. I really and that you define it, which, by the way, he's got a glossary of terms in his book, which you rarely see that in a non sort of science book or academic book. That's really cool too. Again, a nice idea for a book. But yeah, that being authentic in the way that it is defined is a challenge. Mm-hmm. And even now, it's a challenge for some of the reasons I mentioned, at least for me. But also now I think it's a real challenge because it's what people are now saying. The fact that someone has to say you should be authentic tells you that there's a problem, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The world, I don't know. It almost beats you down it beats down authenticity because it wants you to be something that it wants you to be.
Right.
Well,
I do tie it in the book pretty closely to the other two terms that I just spoke about in the beginning of the show here: internal spirit voice and calling journey.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, authenticity is mostly measured against how closely you're listening to your internal spirit voice, which guides you on how to live out your most maximized, unique purpose in the world. And then how closely you're actually following through on that to follow the mysterious steps of your calling journey. And so to me, all three of those things are in alignment. And if you're listening to your internal spirit voice, which again, for me is a divine thing, and then I'm acting on that with boldness, the best I can with my limitations as a human being to interpret those type of things. And I'm acting on them in the world to follow my path, my calling journey. Mm-hmm. That's when I feel authentic. It's when I'm resisting that, when I'm muting my internal spirit voice, when I'm afraid to take bold steps in my calling journey because because it might not be safe. It's those are the moments when I feel inauthentic. I think that's where authenticity for me really is defined and crystallized and shines the brightest.
And this internal spirit voice, you said everyone has it, and I believe you. I'm in that camp. I'm wondering what, in your experience, what percentage of people, or in your experience, how many people can tell you what their internal spirit voice is, and how many act upon it the way you appear to have acted upon yours.
Well, I think it's rare. I mean, I think there's people
Yeah.
in the world that do it, but I think it's very rare, which is part of the reason I write this book. I mean, it is curated for a very certain special type of person that's in touch with these type of things or wants to be. So, I mean, I use a variety of examples and case studies in the book. I'll talk about two right now. One is Steven Pressfield, the well-known author of The War of Art and many other books, prominent thinker. And you know, he tells a story about how he would, you know, work in advertising, save up a bunch of money, and then burn his savings after 4 years just to go write a book with no promise of anything on the other side. And it seemed crazy. And he'd go to quit his job, and his bosses would kind of try to lure him there with the you know, the dangling carrots of you know, perks and increased salary and all of that. But he had this thing inside that he knew he would feel sick inside if he didn't do it, even though it seemed crazy. And there was intervals where he was homeless and, you know, had to live out of his car, and you know, one of his marriages blew up because he was listening to this internal spirit voice. But in the end, over the long arc of time, you can see that there was a reason he listened to it, and that was right. And that had he not done that, he probably would have lived, like Thoreau said, you know, a life of quiet desperation. That would have happened. That's when he would have been inauthentic. But he chose the authentic path by listening to that voice inside. Second example I would give would be the lead singer of the seminal punk rock band Black Flag, Henry Rollins. He was, you know, working at an ice cream shop in Georgetown, was, you know, I guess assistant manager or something like that. Obviously not a high-paying job, but this was in the 80s, and he was doing the workaday thing. But he had this hunger, this fire for the punk rock scene and the authenticity of that music and the raw vigor of that music. And he went to go see a Black Flag play in New York one night, and had an impromptu guest appearance on stage where he went up and sang with them. Turned out they asked him to join the band, and he, without hesitation, listened to that internal spirit voice, jettisoned the petty staycheck of the job, embraced punk rock poverty, got in a van and toured with Black Flag. Back in the 80s, no email, no GPS, you know, no neat tour packages. It was raw. I mean, they were living off dog food at certain points, but he was embracing his calling journey. Long arc of time, he is where he is now. He got a Grammy for reading his book, Get in the Van. He's been in many movies. He was in Sons of Anarchy. He was the voice of Batman on a cartoon. He's a voice actor. He's an author, speaker. He was following that calling journey. That's a tumultuous, mysterious calling journey. You don't know where it's going to lead. You don't know whether you'll have to eat that proverbial dog food or not. But had he not taken that, if he was like the manager of 3 Haagen-Dazs right now, I don't know if the world would be getting what they're supposed to get, and I think he'd be sick in some way, shape, or form.
You know, you have a lot of references to people that I also follow in your book, which is weird in a good way. And Steven Pressfield, for example, I just read today his Wednesday writing email.
I read that this morning too, first thing.
Yeah. And he's talking about Odysseus, right? Or I think it was Odysseus this morning. But but I've heard him speak many times. In fact, I'm doing a speech, like a little TED Talk ish thing for my CEO group about writing a book, and I'm referencing Pressfield several times in that, particular about resistance and putting your ass where your heart wants to be. But I've heard him speak, and I wonder, because he didn't just burn his job following that; he burned his whole life. Like, he burned his whole life,
wandering in New Orleans and the French Quarter, doing
multiple times in this pursuit of writing a book that he just couldn't put his ass in the seat to do, although he wanted to do. But I wonder, like, when I hear him talk now, I think to myself, that guy's still haunted by what he burned to get where he is. Legend of Bagger Vance, I think, is his most famous book for people who don't know Steven Pressfield. But anyway, it just made me think that you might not get past it, even though it gets you where you want to be. Like, there's, you know, to become authentic, sometimes you really you can hurt people, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
And
and
Yeah,
not intentionally. Usually,
no,
it's
no,
usually
no.
unintentional kind of collateral damage.
But when he looks back on it, it's like,
yes.
holy shit, that was a lot of collateral damage that I did to those people.
Or that
Anyway,
occurred to those people because he was probably unaware of what he was doing. I mean, whatever.
okay,
Whatever
sure. Yeah,
right,
you can.
Yeah, I mean,
couch it however you want. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's true. I mean, I have the same hauntings in my life. I mean, I wrote this book. I mean, you read it, right? There's very vulnerable moments. I crashed through bankruptcy, divorce, panic attacks, falling on public assistance, estrangement from my son for a period of time. There's all kinds of these things. And the reality is they can be traced back to me following those promptings inside to follow my calling journey. They are connected to my entrepreneurial efforts. They are connected to my artistic efforts. They're connected to my authentic way of being that doesn't really align real well in the expectations of normal 9-to-5 life. And frankly, even for family life,
right.
It's a tough, hard reality that I have to find ways to reconcile all the time. I have a great relationship now with my current wife and all my children and all of that. But, hence the tumultuous.
Yeah.
Hence the mysterious. It's not a path of ease.
Yeah. And hence the journey towards wabi-sabi.
That's right.
Right.
The journey towards wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is my favorite definition of wabi-sabi is rocker David Lee Roth's definition, which is it's perfect because it's a little fucked up.
Right.
So it's finding the perfection and imperfection, and again, none of this is this self-indulgent, willful chasing after chaos and failure for the sake of it or for the thrill of it. Like you want to avoid all of this stuff as much as possible and
Most
still align with their calling journey. Right. So failure rule number 4 is failure prevention. Like, the unspoken failure rule is try to avoid it as much as possible. And then you have to dispel that one out, right?
Thank you. Thank you for saying that though, because this failure thing is like authenticity and it's really become something that people want to, it used to be something that people would run from, right?
Yeah.
Now it's embraced, but I still don't think it's changed very much in that you don't want to fail.
Mm-hmm. You do not. You do not. When it emerges inevitable and you stridently fight against it and you creatively challenge it, but you ultimately accept it, then fine. Find a way to use it, allow it to shape you and grow you, hopefully into something where you're actually gaining from harm, like Nassim Taleb talks about in Anti-Fragile. But you do not want to go after it. You want to avoid it. You want to think strategically. Failure rule number 4 is build your thing 1 and thing 2 dependency. Thing 1 is that scaffolding, that undergirding in your life, building those kind of low meaning safety belts and suspenders that might be able to support you as much as possible in a stabilized way. So you can then have some room and freedom and flexibility to go on that off-road adventuring artistically, creatively, entrepreneurially, and minimize the damage, the failures, or the downside, or allow the wait time to incubate, right?
Yeah.
But,
right.
And I didn't do that well early in my life. So that was one of the lessons, and that was how that rule came about, because now I think about that very intentionally. It goes along with what you're saying, this whole idea of failure porn. Like we don't worship at the twisted altar of self-indulgent failure. It makes no sense. But we still need to study failure. We need to, accept it. We need to anticipate it. We need to know that it usually travels pretty closely with difficult pursuits. And we need to find ways to maximize and optimize it and integrate it into, a highlight of our story if we handle it correctly. I mean, I think of like Jack Nicholson in The Departed when he's playing Irish gangster Whitey Bulger. And, he's like, I'm an artist. You give me anything, I'll get something out of it. And that's how we got to view failure. You don't want it, but you throw that at me, I'm an artist. I'm gonna get something out of it, no matter what it is.
One of my favorite movies, until the end with the little rat things. I thought that was kind of messed it up there at the end.
Yeah.
So do you mind if we dig a little bit into this business divorce that you mentioned?
Sure.
Can we get into, because I really like, that's a failure that a lot of the listeners can connect with. I can connect with that, but I'd love to get the I'd love to connect with the details of as much as you're willing to share about how you got into it. Because, it's funny, most business failures start between two people who would go to the end of the world for each other, let's say, or three people or whatever at one time. And they end up somewhere, 180 degrees from that down the road. I don't know what yours was, but that's how I've gotten into some of the ones I am. And I just really love to learn from what you experienced.
So it was a very interesting situation. There's kind of a dichotomy of two business partners that were involved in this venture. I was at a time in my life where I just was not making enough money to support my family, adequately. I was not finding a way. I was not finding any 9-to-5 job with a salary that could do that, and that was the case for my 20s and 30s. So mostly, I rarely held down a job working for somebody else. It was mostly entrepreneur pursuits, running record labels, financial planning. Then I got into online lending, owned a gym, those type of things. Many of them overlapping at one time. I had a portfolio pursuits mentality. So at the time, I was in a partnership for an online lending company. We had purchased a fitness center, so we were running that. We had the operations right next to each other. The office for one was next to the gym. We even had some employees working at both facilities. I mean, there was days where I'm literally like in my gym doing a leg press where somebody from the lending company would come over and ask me a question about an underwriting package, So it was like that kind of synergy. And I was also finishing my first spy novel and doing stuff with my record labels. I had a lot going on. But my partner had gotten into trouble in the mortgage industry in the 2008 crisis as a mortgage,
Hey, everybody, just a quick pause here to let you know how much I appreciate that you've made time for my podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, please become one today. Leave a review and tell a friend. Now, let's get back to the show.
Running mortgages and all the ninja loans and all of that. And he ended up having to go to federal prison. And there I was left kind of having to run all the businesses without him. There was a capital deficit. I took on another investor. The investor, frankly, was a relative. So that made it all the more complicated, which is, a rule that many people say you shouldn't do. But these were the circumstances that really were one of my only options at the time. Being in that space at that time, it was quickly being regulated in very ways you could not anticipate. The business began faltering for a number of reasons. We had concentration risk that we were working to address but couldn't address quickly enough in the portfolio. There was just changing regulations, all kinds of things, and it ended up losing a lot of money, right? And was losing it. And so at a certain point, there was all kinds of issues between the partner and I. I decided to walk away. He continued on with another partner. Ultimately, it still failed, but he kept going. I walked away. It was right before Operation Choke Point, which was a DOJ effort to kind of extra congressionally regulate the online lending industry. At the time, I had other income sources, but that was probably my core income. So it was a big hiccup. There's still assets and what have you. So I was going to be okay short term. And it was really in that failure space of the emotional baggage of the business divorce. That then coupled with a fast follow of a personal marital divorce. I found myself at one point, no office to go to by day, no home to go to by night. I was living in a hotel room, and it was in that failure space that I decided to leverage leverage chaos as an idea engine. And 5 things were born there. In that space, I began a lead generation company. First I started doing consulting. That became a lead generation company proper with some partners, which was very lucrative. I finished my first spy novel. I reinvested in my record labels to release some records. I started my job as a fintech banker, and now 10 years into that, a few promotions, and that's been a great, amazing kind of anchor in my work-life tapestry. And then in that time, I also really began writing failure rules. So it was like in that empty space, I saw it as an opportunity. What else can I build in these ashes of failure? And 5 very fruitful things emerged with different timelines and priorities and success measures. But it was all in that space of that business divorce and that marital divorce.
Okay.
That's probably a roundabout answer. Specifically on the business divorce, what questions do you have that might be useful to your listeners?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is you say you walked away, and I wonder what that means, because when you're involved in a business as an owner, it's hard to walk away. And I did read that. I read that you walked away, and I'm thinking to myself, how did you walk away? How did you feel?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was a minority partner.
Yeah.
But I also had a salary as COO. So I really walked away from the COO position. And in my shares, then I ended up, selling them back. Right. So that was the walk away. But the shares were not worth much at that point because of the declining of the business. Right.
Yeah.
So
okay. Sure.
I walked away in the sense that I found working with that partner irreconcilable at the time. And I was not able to stay in the fight in any meaningful way because the salary that was being imposed upon me was not tenable and was not discussed in a way that was productive or creative. And it was something I had to do.
So that was sort of the last straw kind of thing where the majority partner or whatever said, take it or leave it, Andrew, basically. And you were like, leave it, I guess.
Yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
And there really wasn't, and that was kind of it. There wasn't any real creative way of approaching it. And there could have been a number of things that could have been done. But there was not a communication template there that was workable.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. And that was, as you mentioned, followed by this, divorce, breakup of your marriage. And then you said, 5 things came out of that. And what I was thinking to myself is, okay, is there something missing between the 5 things that came out of it and those couple of bad things that happened? Like in my life and in my book, I have a similar, it's not similar circumstantially, but similar feeling about 10 years into my first business. And I refer to it, this place I dropped into as a valley of uncertainty where, me and entrepreneurs and people in general, they drop into this space when they just don't know where to turn. And in that valley, they're sort of waiting for somebody to come along and just tell them it's going to be okay and reach their hand down in there and pull them up and say, here's what you have to do. Was there someone that came along and did you find yourself in a valley like that or something? And did someone or someone's come along and help you find these 5 new paths that grew out of this sort of tumultuous situation?
It wasn't someone like in the flesh necessarily, but
okay.
There was a song by this band, Hatebreed, this metal band that I'm really into, called Divinity of Purpose. That ended up being a defined term in the book. And it was really that song talking about the pain of discipline is less than that of regret. I held my feet to edge. I forget the exact words, but essentially it was a divinity of purpose, bringing you out of that kind of gutter state. And it was like the strength of that music combined with my internal spirit voice, and a sense of divine strength that, 3 things fell into line. Ideas, I revved up my idea engine in the face of chaos. Action, I came up with a plan to pursue each 5 of those threads that I mentioned. And then it was the faith to pursue them and to maintain enthusiasm, right? I mean, enthusiasm is like the currency of entrepreneurs and artists to me and creatives. I think of the quote from Winston Churchill, success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. That quote has sustained me. It's my enthusiasm to find that those areas of micro momentum that are positive, no matter how micro, how small, in times of chaos and devastation, that power me through the brutalities of failure and the valleys of darkness, right? And that was kind of the mentality when I was in that space.
Okay. And I do appreciate you I think that was in the book, because I have it written here, that quote from Churchill. I have a lot of Churchill quotes, but I did not have that one. And when I read that, I was like, holy crap, man. That's a good one, right? Because
It
if you're
is.
optimistic and enthusiastic, you can take a lot of pain
Yes, you
because you
can
can because you can get rid of it quickly. It's not that it doesn't hurt you, right?
metabolize it.
But you can,
Yes,
yeah, metabolize it. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
yeah,
Metabolize it and then use it as, use that to build muscle,
that's
right?
right. That's
Metabolize it,
right.
build muscle. Um, you mentioned faith, and I watched one of your many YouTube videos about what you call your core operating system, and
Mm.
it intrigued me a lot. And by the way, well done on the. I don't know who helps you with your videos or whatever, but your videos, that one especially that I watched, was high quality video, really nicely done. Um, so can you talk to me more about your core operating system and what that actually means to you?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I really it's for me it's the framework of Christianity.
Okay.
So I would say categorize it more as contemplative Christianity. So it's like I'm not a churchgoer. I probably wouldn't fit the bill for like the image of like a good Christian. I smoke, I drink, I curse a lot. I'm covered in tattoos and love rock and roll. So probably doesn't really track real well. But it still goes back to that internal spirit voice. It's the dimension
That's
of
what I
God
thought.
within. It's realizing, like, for me, like, I think of religion as a technology in some ways. Like, if I look at the world religions, what problem is it going to solve for me? And for me, the biggest problem is, what is the chasm between my imperfection and the notion of some perfect divinity? And Christianity allows framework to reconcile that chasm. So that works for me. In the video, though, I don't just talk about those who embrace Christian faith. I might talk about my friend John Joseph, who wrote the foreword, who's a Hare Krishna, and how that's his core operating system and what that's done for him to get him out of street violence and homelessness and drug addiction, and help him heal from abuse when he was younger, from foster parents. I talk about Gigi Butler, the cupcake
Yeah.
entrepreneur, and she is a Christian, so that's her core operating system. And I talk about Tim Ferriss and how Stoicism buttresses his life and gives him that compass, even though it's a non-faith tradition in Stoicism. So I still think that there's lots of value and wisdom to be taken from a variety of faith expressions, but for me, it would be the framework of Christianity.
Okay. And you mentioned Ryan Holiday in your book too, who wrote a book called The Daily Stoic, amongst probably 20
Yep.
others.
Yeah.
Is that a book? Have you
I
ever
just
done
finished
that?
Discipline is Destiny just now, and I got a signed copy from him. And
Okay.
I visited his bookstore
Oh, you did?
August. Yeah.
All right.
He wasn't there, but I dropped off some copies of Failure Rules, and I was told they would get to his hands. But yeah, he is one of the best thinkers of our time, I think, and one of the most introspective and astute writers of our time.
So I want to. His book is called The Purple Something, or the Peach Pump. I can't remember the name of it, but it's got a kind of a.
By Ryan?
Yeah, his bookstore.
Oh yeah. It's at the Painted Porch.
Painted Porch. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I know it was purple. I know it was a P. Hey, well, I guess I'll go to James Altucher first, because, like I said, you have, Pressfield, Altucher. You talk a lot about Lemmy from Motorhead. Which I first got introduced to Motorhead when I was working at Fritz's gas station in Ardmore, Pennsylvania.
Oh, Ardmore, that's my neck of the woods. Yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Havertown.
I graduated from Haverford High School. I went to Haverford.
Oh, you did? I went to St. Dennis.
St. Dennis down the
School.
Street.
Yeah. I live like
Drexel Hill.
300 feet from Haverford High School. My mom still lives there.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I graduated from. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, my dad graduated from there too. Yeah. But yeah, we sort of you mentioned a lot of people, as I said earlier, that I follow or that I'm fans of, including some of the ones you just mentioned. But James Altucher, I'd like to get your sense about him. You mentioned his book Choose Yourself as having had a tremendous impact on you. I think it was one of the books you talked about, walking on the beach, and when you were deciding or figuring out or when it came to you to write this book? I think there were like John Joseph and Lemmy, and then there was 2 books, Altucher's being one of them, and then there was Churchill. I don't know. I can't remember all of it, but
The Art of Being Unmistaken.
yeah, Rao, yeah. And I'm just curious, what is it? Maybe more than just his book, but what is it about Altucher that makes you follow him? Because he's a weird cat. Like
that's why I love him.
Yeah.
Love him.
Okay. Yeah.
with the fro and like the curiosity and the unashamedness of just putting it all out there, almost vomiting on the page in some way, but somehow it's very useful, instructive, and beautiful, and gives you some transparency into a way of thinking. His ability to get up after he fails. I mean, made a ton of money, lost it all. Made a ton of money, lost it all. His relationships up and down. I mean, I think he's on his 3rd marriage right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the beauty in his curiosity, the critical thinking he has in terms of analyzing his journey, and the whole like, he talks about an idea machine. I talk about leveraging chaos as an idea engine, but they're very akin mindsets.
Right.
Like him with his waiter pad and writing 10 ideas down a day.
10 ideas a day. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if they suck, it's just the exercise of getting that brain working. Like I do that. I got a cigar box full of just sticky notes with random ideas from like the last 5 years. I haven't even looked at that box in a while, but it's just exercising that muscle, It's him talking about how, and this aligns with Srinivas Rao's other book, only is better than best. The idea of like intersecting ideas to create something new. You don't have to be the best at something, but if you're the only, like putting 2 ideas together, coming up with something wildly new, like the Irish punk band Dropkick Murphys, who mix traditional Irish instrumentation with punk rock.
Yeah,
they might not be the best punk band, but they're one of the best Irish punk bands, because it's like they're having this alchemy of something new, right? And
they create their own space.
Yeah, and there's like those type of things. It's
okay.
And just the idea of he really was the one. His book gave me a lot of strength to process a lot of the failures I was going through and figure out or identify a lot of light and new possible ways forward, particularly in the information age, the democratized information age. I mean, while there's still plenty of digital gatekeepers, I think net, there's a lot less gatekeeping now. We have more access as creatives and entrepreneurs to start fresh and to come up with new things and to communicate and to start podcasts like this and write books and get them out to the world. And I just think we're living in a very amazing age in terms of the ability to create, distribute art and start businesses.
It's funny with every time I feel like I've got Altucher figured out, he comes up with some new area of expertise that I'm like, what the
crypto comedy to investment advice to
chess master. He's like, for those of you who don't know, you should follow James Altucher, listen to his podcast. He's got books like Choose Yourself. He's a 52-year-old guy but he's like a little boy savant living in a 52-year-old man's body. Yeah. But with a man's worth of experience.
Yes.
Like the guy just has so much natural curiosity and experiences, like just anyway, really interesting and provocative.
Like when he lived in Airbnbs for a year or two.
For years,
only had like a backpack and that was it. And then eventually surmised that, well, that was an interesting experiment, but I'm going to go back to living in a home.
Right.
But it was still instructive. It was still informative. It was still taught him a lot, and him documenting that journey and, those type of little off-road experiments that he, broadcast.
Talk about a Pressfield moment, huh, Andrew? Like, I'm just going to get rid of all of my possessions and I'm just going to live in Airbnbs. I'm just going to move around, live in Airbnbs. And write and think and write my waiter pad, write my notepad,
I just had a conversation with another guy I write about in the book, Joshua Coburn. I don't remember if you remember the section on him, but he and his wife sold almost everything. I think they only had them and their kids. They just had a backpack and they moved to Nicaragua 2-3 years ago. I don't know exactly when. And he's a digital marketer, so he could still work remotely there. But they just kind of decided to move to Nicaragua. Serendipitously, once they get there, turns out there's this opportunity in the cigar industry. He ends up buying a cigar brand. The factory's right there in Nicaragua, and he owns Dissident Cigars and runs that now with his wife. And just thinking about like something inside him told him he needed to move to Nicaragua. He didn't exactly know why. They sold almost everything, uprooted their kids, and boom, opportunity was there. It's like it's those type of stories that to me show that somebody is paying attention to that voice inside with cuteness.
So let me piggyback on that, because for those of you who haven't yet read Andrew's book, the way that it's structured chapter wise is there's a quote followed by a lesson, followed by a story of someone like the person he just mentioned, followed by really a story from his life that parallels to it. Is that a fair way to say how it's structured?
That's exactly right. That's a structure. And each chapter and lesson connects to, rolls up to an overarching rule, which is the parts of the book. So there's 5 parts of the book connected to 5.
So those are the 5 parts.
And the chapters collapse underneath with their own sub lessons. And you're right. The structure of each chapter is it ties to the rule, has some sort of case study, personal example, and some sort of just description on the lesson itself and how it connects to the rule.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is, how did you decide or choose the other people's stories that you were going? Just a short break here to ask you a question. Have you read my book? It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck, and it's available on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere else. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download your very own copy today. I'm going to describe, that, and then how did you choose them? Because he's got a lot. There's a lot of chapters in this book. I mean, it's I don't know how many, but there's a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of thinking that goes into that. And I'm curious how did you decide on the structure, the quote, the lesson, and then the story? I mean, I get how you got your stories, but how did you just choose like the Cupcake Ladies or there's so many, all of them in there. How did you choose which ones to use?
It was kind of organic. I mean, there was some strategy to it in that I wanted it to be diverse from a variety of entrepreneurial spaces, but I also wanted to really make sure that my personality interests were also, weighted in a proportionate way. So my love of punk music, cigars, tattoos, that's throughout, right? So there's people from those spaces, whether it's Sailor Jerry, Godfather of traditional tattooing, different, punk artists, Lemmy from Motorhead, Henry Rollins, whoever else. That stuff's in there. So there's these niches and, people in the cigar space. But then it was like I wanted a wide cross section to show the different stories on how people found their way in unorthodox career paths or artistic pursuits. And most of them are just stories that I either really touched me and struck me and spoke to me in other books I've read, or people that I followed that I really admired, the way that you admire, or I don't know if you admire him, but you follow Altucher, and I admire him and follow him. Yeah. And so it was just like a lot of it was natural because these are the people that I don't know that were already guiding me through so many decisions, that their wisdom was already informing me so much. And so this really is a book of my virtual mentors of in many times in my life, like that's where I turn. I don't really turn to my peers or people who just happen to be geographically around me or happen to be in my family, because I may love them all, but that doesn't mean they're actually equipped to speak to my circumstances with the right type of unique wisdom. It's a large world out there, and that's why we have books. That's why we have artists. That's why we have music, because we can then access curated, distilled wisdom and messaging that might be uniquely, applicable to us.
Right. Okay. You make it sound easy. I know that's not easy. So you got these from, reading books, listening to podcasts. Maybe you heard about the person or, heard about their story or something. Another thing we have in common is a degree in English. So I have an English degree. You have an English degree.
Yes.
So it makes me think now to ask you about your reading habits. So
Yeah.
what are your reading habits, and why is reading important? I'm assuming it is important to you. Why is
Sure.
reading important to you?
Just the written word, especially reading text, not just listening to audiobooks, which a lot of people do. I'm selling more audiobooks than I am physical books, it looks like. But just the idea that you can pause, go back, reread something, grab another nuance out of it, meditate on the application in your own life, figure out how that can be animated in your own life. Even fiction. I'm a fiction writer, and I read a lot of spy novels. Even just, thinking about the heroism or the hero's journey in those stories, and the character nuances and personality nuances, and how they can inform ideas on how to live a rich creative life. All those things animate my real life. So, like, unlike Ryan Holiday, who says, win the morning, win the day, I'm the opposite. I'm a night owl. For me, I wait till like 9 o'clock or so. Everybody's in bed. The world shuts out. I pour a bourbon, light a cigar, and I slipstream into my creative space. And then writing comes easy then. Reading, I read a lot. And I snack. I'll have like a stack of 10 books next to me, right next to my ashtray. And I'll read a chapter from each. And I try to switch them up so that they're wildly diverse, which really forces me to have like a creative, like, shock almost. Just like switching up your workouts or switching up a diet abruptly. I do that with the book. So I'll read a chapter of a spy novel, and chapter of like a business development book, and then the chapter of like a biography. And I just try to shock them up. And it takes me forever to finish the book because I'm always reading 10 more at a time.
Okay.
But that keeps my creative juices flowing and gives me a kind of a cross section of inputs to stew on.
And do you keep your books?
I do. I got way too many books just all over the place. It's a problem because I don't like ebooks. It's a real problem.
Well, as you know, I hate PDFs or ebooks.
Right. Me too. Me too. I don't like looking at screens unless I have to. And I have to a lot. So when I don't have to, I don't want to.
And when you, this is like, just a softball of a question, so you can tell me that you don't want to answer it. But when you wrote the book, or not even when you wrote it, when you had made that decision on that beach in Brigantine, I think it was.
Yeah.
How to write the book? What did you want? Like, I know you worked with Scribe, and they make you go through this process of defining your avatar and what's all this stuff. But when you were on that beach, Andrew, and you said, "Yeah, I'm going to do this," what did you want? What did you want to accomplish?
I wasn't really thinking of accomplishment. I wasn't really thinking of what might boomerang back to me. And that sounds very pious of me, but it's the truth. I just knew that I had this stuff burning inside me. Like Rocky talks about, I got something in the basement. There was this rumbling inside me. And I just knew I had to like get it out, organize it, and put it out into the world, and hope that it would be useful to others. It was like this divinity of purpose, to go back to that phrase. It was just like, right. I was convicted. I had to do this. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what it looked like in the end. I don't know how it will do commercially or anything like that, but I just had to do it. And so over many life changes, other ventures, all kinds of things, took 7 or so years to write, another year or so to edit, and just followed through bit by bit, piece by piece.
And I don't think I can let you get out of here without asking you about, so it's one thing to write about failures. It's another thing to write about vices. And you write about your trinity of vices. And you've mentioned the cigar several times. Bourbon got thrown in there once or twice. So
although right now I'm drinking Irish whiskey. This is not bourbon. I switched it up today. I had a lot of bourbon last night. Right now it's Irish whiskey.
So alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine, you sort of remind me of Lemmy, because I think he would carry around a container with him at all times.
That's right.
So what is this trinity of vices? Help me understand what that's all about and why.
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to Churchill. I get more out of alcohol than it gets out of me. I control it. It doesn't control me.
Yeah.
I rarely get like drunk, right? I'll slow sip 2 or 3 bourbons, watered down over the course of 5-6 hours with food and whatnot, right? And smoking cigars. So I'm an enjoyer, not a binger. Cigars, I'm 2 to 3 a day. It's just life without cigars is like dry toast to me. It's just the aromatic pleasure, It helps me cognitively. I love the flavor. I love the nuances between cigars. I love the art on the cigar bands. I love the culture. Cigar lounges, you meet the best people, and it's just such a great enhancement to my life. And when I'm working or writing or thinking, and I got a cigar in my hand, nothing feels like work. It's just everything. There's just this is flow between the vice and the virtue of the art, right? Like they go together for me.
It's a component of your internal spirit, boys.
There you go, right? And and caffeine in the morning, like I Death Wish coffee is one of my favorite brands. And, I'm probably 4 or 5 cups of black coffee a day, something like that.
Okay.
But then I also balance it. I work out a lot, drink a lot of liquid IV. I drink my Jocko greens in the morning and the protein shakes and all of that. So, it seems extreme, but I think I have some extreme balances too. I mean, I go to the gym 3 days a week. I hike a lot, swim a lot, cycle a lot,
I'm not pointing it out because I think that the trinity of vices is a bad thing. I'm pointing it out because the way that you put it together just intrigued me. Like most people it's easier for people to talk about their failures than their real things that they consider vices.
I just don't consider these to me aren't failures. These are beautiful accents and elixirs that enhance my life in many ways, as long as I control them and they don't control me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. You're right. But anyway, thank you for being willing to talk about your quote unquote vices as well as your failures and your successes.
No problem.
So I do thank you very, very much for coming on the show today. It's been an honor to get to know you. Reading your book was an honor, although it sucked reading it the way I did. Just super well done. So if you want to read a great book, and it's not, it's called Failure Rules, but believe me, there's a lot in there about it's not about failing. It's about recovering from failing.
Right.
So Failure Rules, the 5 rules of failure for entrepreneurs, creatives, and in a word he made up himself, authentics.
That's right.
You can find it, and I guess Amazon is where you drive
anywhere books are sold online.
Anywhere?
We got audiobook, ebook, hardcover, paperback. I mean, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy books online.
And his website, Andrew Thorp King, THORP, no E, THORP King.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. As I mentioned, he does a lot of cool stuff there. Andrew, is there something you want to leave us with before we bust out the outro on this thing?
No, that's it. I mean, you put it in the right places. Instagram is where I'm most active, at Andrew Thorp King, no E on the end of Thorp. Also, if you go to my website, there's a great, you can sign up for a free mini course, Failure Rules mini course, and there's a great merchandise e-store there too, with all Soul on Fire Supply Company, which is a merchandise line I started that is a companion to the book too.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Mike, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and prompts here.